Yes, sir.
The GI Bill provides an opportunity for people who have served in any of the uniformed services to get into education, but there's a broader body of people who could benefit from other federal aid. There used to be national defense loans and other things in my era back in the 60s going to college that no longer seem to be available. Is there any move within the Senate or within the government to try to provide some of those federal opportunities to get resources for non-veterans to go to college? And then I would expect that the dollars expended on those individuals would pay back as well as the dollars that are spent on.
Well, those are good points. Let me say two things about that. One is from the time that I was working as a committee counsel in the Congress in the late 1970s into 1980, 81, federal assistance for education has grown incredibly. Starting with the old logs and saws back in the late 70s to what you see now with Pell Grants and a lot of these other programs. In fact, when we were doing research on this GI Bill, the number that I was looking at was, I think, $19 billion to go into educational assistance in other than the veterans programs, as we were moving this forward, and I used that in order to justify the expenditure here with the GI Bill. The second is that I have a special interest in what I call the Second Chance Act for Education. We've introduced the bill on it from our office, the idea that there's a lot of people who kind of fall off the off-ramps young in life, and maybe you're 17 years old, you get pregnant, or you decide you're going to rebel, you don't want to go to school, and you go get a job, and then you get to be 30 years old, and you go, geez, how do I fit back and get going again? And we've done work. I've actually introduced legislation on this to build incentives with employers to allow their employees to further their education in that track as well. So we're on it, and I think the government programs now compared to where they were 30 years ago are pretty good. Yes, sir.
You're the Secretary of Navy, I was in the Marine Corps. Thank you. I did benefit from the Montgomery GI Bill. I've been a special education teacher in K-12 for 14 years now. And during that time, funding has decreased in terms of the demands on special education. The Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act has never been funded more than 40% of what the mandate is, the load on local localities. What's being done in the Senate and Congress to address that?
First of all, I appreciate your service. What part of the Marine Corps were you?
Third Marine Air Wing.
Marine Air Wing? I'm looking at it, I think you were too tall to fit into the nose of a helicopter.
My last day, General Gray was a great appointment. His comment on Marine Corps.
General Gray is a great one. And on these programs, I know that people struggle with the many different ways with the No Child Left Behind Act in terms of what the funding structure should be and what the penalties should be for schools that haven't met it. And I know just watching in the last couple of months, there seems to be a willingness to go tackle the federal end of the educational programs writ large. And so I would imagine that the question you raised would be a part of that analysis. We just lost so much time, quite frankly, on the health care debate that some of these other things just didn't rise to the Senate floor. Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Stephen Latimer. I live in Charlottesville. I've heard reports that students who are receiving federal financial aid who unfortunately get caught with drugs and convicted for drug crimes can lose their financial aid from the government. I think that's unfair. I want to know, do you agree or disagree? And if you agree with my assessment, what are you doing to change that?
Well, it's always dangerous to answer a question where you don't know the exact information that's behind it. It would really depend on what you're talking about in terms of a conviction. But my view in general is that people who have been convicted of crimes, when they are done, they are done. And they should have full restoration of rights just as any other citizen. When you have paid the price, it's time to be, if you pay the price and you're going to act responsibly, it's time for you to be reabsorbed properly in your community. And I don't know the exact situation you're talking about, but it would fit under that philosophy. I think I have time for one more question, and after who it is.
In this time of tight budgets and more budget cuts, how do you feel about the substantial size of the military budget in this country? How do we go forward? Do we maintain our current level of expenditure, or can we not afford to do that?
I didn't hear the last part of what you said.
Can we not afford to maintain that level of expenditure, or
well, the questions about the expenditures. Let me say, first of all, I have supported the notion of a reduction in federal spending across the board. Senators McCaskill and Sessions have introduced a bill, 3% reduction. I think that's doable. When I was in the Pentagon, we had what was called the Graham-Rudman Act, which mandated a 10% reduction in federal government, 5% reduction overall in federal government, but half the programs were fenced, the entitlement programs were fenced, so it meant 10% reductions in ongoing programs. And I don't think we need to go that far at this point, but I do think you can find the money. Having spent 4 years on the Defense Resources Board in the Pentagon, rather than simply going on one program or another, if you say you're going to have a cut, there are places where people can go and find ways to make these cuts without affecting our national security. I think the Pentagon could be included in that. What we really need, I think, in terms of our defense spending, is to re-examine very carefully how we're fighting against the war against international terrorism. The funding for Iraq and Afghanistan was non-budgeted funding, most of it. It's doing what was called supplemental appropriations, and that was probably $1 trillion. It was a big part of how our economy started to have so many difficulties. It wasn't the only part of it, but it was certainly a part of it. And I think we can work our way into a way that we can fight international terrorism, address this threat without being an occupying force, permanent occupying force in that part of the world. That's not what we need to be, a permanent occupying force in that part of the world. And when you do that, I wrote this actually, wrote a piece on 9/12, the day after 9/11, about my view of how to fight international terrorism. One paragraph in there was, do not occupy territory, because we have the great maneuver forces in the world turned into static defensive positions, and they absorb a tremendous amount of money, and they can't get out and do what they need to do with respect to the mobility and the maneuverability that these other forces have. So we can think smarter about defense. I think we need to work on our strategic programs. We need to get that side up more, and I think we need to get ground involvements down more and be more focused. So there are ways that we can address the issues of national security in a more efficient way and not be at risk. I don't want to here to say I just recommended halving the defense budget or something, but there are certainly programs and efficiencies that you can find in defense. And by the way, I think Secretary Gates, our Secretary of Defense, has done really great service to this country by starting to point out some areas where we could bring in some efficiencies. I appreciate y'all coming over here today. It's good to be able to spend some time with you, and for those of you who've served, thank you very much for your service. Thank you.
We thank Senator Webb for spending this time time with us, and we don't want him to forget his time here. So it's a pleasure to present you with a Virginia Cup with our PVCC logo. We hope you'll display that in your office. But no United States Senator from Virginia should be without a PVCC hoodie.